My heart is full today, full of gratitude for the trust you have placed in me, full of love for our country, and full of resolve. The outcome of this election is not what we wanted, not what we fought for, not what we voted for, but hear me when I say, the light of America's promise will always burn bright. As long as we never give up and as long as we keep fighting. Now, I know folks are feeling and experiencing a range of emotions right now. I get it. But we must accept the results of this election. A fundamental principle of American democracy is that when we lose an election, we accept the results. That principle, as much as any other, distinguishes democracy from monarchy or tyranny. And anyone who seeks the public trust must honor it.
As part of yesterday's concession speech from Vice President Kamala Harris in Washington, D.C., as she promised to keep fighting for democracy, equal rights, and the rule of law. Ahead of that speech, Vice President Harris called President-elect Trump to congratulate him. According to a senior Harris aide, the vice president discussed the importance of a peaceful transfer of power and being a president for all Americans. The Trump campaign also put out a statement reading in part, President Trump acknowledged Vice President Harris on her strength, professionalism, and tenacity throughout the campaign, and both leaders agreed on the importance of unifying the country. President Biden also spoke with President-elect Trump over the phone yesterday to congratulate him and to express his commitment to a smooth transition of power. Biden also invited Trump to meet him at the White House, though no date has been set. Biden will address the nation this morning at 11 a.m. regarding the election results. And good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It's only Thursday, November 7th, Joe. Kind of feels
I thought yesterday was Friday, right? I thought it was like, okay, end of the week. Yeah. Well, no, it was a great. I thought it was a great speech by Kamala Harris. I thought she obviously, for good reasons, still sort of in that campaign mode, and obviously, though she again, I think she hit the marks throughout the campaign, and did extremely well. I think she did far better than most people expected her to do at the beginning of that very short and abbreviated campaign. It was such an extraordinarily short and abbreviated campaign. And in the states, you know, you look at, there are a lot of things to look at across the map that you see states like Texas and Florida and Ohio. Those have just gone so deeply red compared to even where they were 4 years ago when Joe Biden was getting closer, certainly in Texas and within 3 or 4 in Florida. But those states are deep red. Ohio, a deep red. Pennsylvania party registration has gotten far more Republican over the last several years. The races were still close, though, Willie, in Wisconsin, still close in Michigan. Pennsylvania was more like 2 percentage points. We had Democrats winning Wisconsin and Detroit and Michigan yesterday. Pennsylvania is still up in the air right now, but that's looking like that's going to go to Dave McCormick, but it's still very close. But there were such transformational changes in this race yesterday. And, you know, Jonathan asked at the end of his show, where should Democrats go from here? I'd suggest France for a couple of weeks and think it over. 32% of Americans, only 32% of Americans who voted identified themselves as Democrats. Donald Trump won, if I'm not mistaken, I think I saw this in Mike Allen's newsletter, 1 of 3 votes from people of color. And Donald Trump has put together a working class coalition across racial lines that nobody has done in this country in over 50 years. And so, yes, people need to look back at the campaign, and they certainly should feel free to call out Donald Trump for all the things that he said that were shocking and deeply offensive. But if you're a Democrat right now and think that's going to get you elected 4 years from now, it didn't get you elected a couple of nights ago. So it's time for the Democrats to look in the mirror and figure out exactly what went wrong. And I think, Willie, you and I have been talking about it over the last 4 years or so. It shouldn't be really that hard for them to figure out exactly where they went wrong. We'll just see if they're self-aware enough to do it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a massive structural problem now for the Democratic Party. So there's been all this sort of Monday morning quarterbacking about the vice presidential choice and all these things that we traditionally hear. That would not have made a difference. Let's be clear about that. About the shortened campaign, that, of course, was difficult. Kamala Harris didn't have time to introduce herself in a way that, say, Barack Obama did. But the fact of the matter is Donald Trump just wiped out the Democratic Party. You sometimes, as a political opponent, as you know, Joe, you just have to tip your cap to the other side, not for the rhetoric, not for the behavior, but for the way he won. The people he brought into his party, the people who felt they didn't have a home, Latino men, some young black men as well, even women, young people. He did much better with young people than most people expected. And that is a big shift that the Democratic Party has to reckon with. And at this moment, I'm not sure what the way back is for Democrats when you've lost, been wiped out. Donald Trump did better in 48 of the 50 states than he did last time around, despite all the everything that was coming at him. So Democrats need to sit and think about what happened. The question will be, do they have the will to change? Do they have a message that will be appealing to those people that Donald Trump now brought into his coalition?
I hate Monday morning quarterbacking here. I really do. And I don't want this to be taken as a blanket criticism for the people that were running Kamala Harris's campaign, because they were great. Jen O'Malley Dillon, just the best on the ground that there is. She was facing, though, there was a red wave this year.
Yeah.
The press got it wrong and the pollsters got it wrong 2 years ago. That wave was somewhere out coming off of Africa and moving across the Atlantic and coming. It just took it 2 years more to get here. But, man, it crashed on shore two nights ago. But, Jonathan Lemire, there was some reluctance to go there, to talk about the things that were concerning Americans that really mattered this year. Illegal immigration, the mass border crossings. Yes, they put a bill out there, and yes, that was good. But there wasn't anything more definitive on it than that. That was something that concerned Hispanic voters. It's something that concerned black voters. That concerned something that concerned all voters. We will talk again. We've been talking about the transgender ad that we kept talking about on this show. 30,000 times it ran, over $30 million, and kept talking about it, saying this is going to be a problem in the 3 states that you need. There's a Financial Times article. They don't understand my life. The Trump campaign spent millions. This is Financial Times. Trump campaign spent millions of dollars on political ads focusing on transgender issues in the final stretch of the race. Kamala is for they, them, one said. Trump is for you. Quote, the ads on the transgender stuff were really unsettling to the people, said Deb Dassow, chair of the Democratic Party in Wisconsin's Ozaukee County, a Republican stronghold in the Milwaukee suburbs that broke for Trump. I mean, you don't have to be a Republican, though I was a Republican. You don't have to be a conservative, though I was a conservative, to understand that seeing ad after ad after ad in NFL football games saying that taxpayers were going to be funding transgender surgeries for inmates, it's not something that's going to play well in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania among men. And yet they just didn't respond to it because they were afraid to respond to it because it might offend some small subset of their base. And the thing is, nobody's saying to be anything but kind to all Americans. This just had to do with responding to the ad and saying, hey, wait a second, that was Donald Trump's policy that they're attacking. But they wouldn't even do that because, again, they're afraid to offend, always afraid to offend, always afraid to offend on border security, always afraid to offend on so many other issues. They're at 32%, and they have lost working class America. The question is, how long until they understand that this isn't just about tax cuts. This isn't just about economics. This is about cultural markers that matter greatly in these people's lives.
Yeah, this is certainly a lot of second guessing among Democrats that they should have had a more robust response to that particular argument. There's a lot of finger pointing in the party right now. But let's be clear, the President Biden's legislative record robust, but they're even in real time. His West Wing acknowledged they were slow to address two issues: immigration and inflation. And they feel like they made progress on both, but that was a lasting impression made on voters, and Republicans hammered it home. There's also a similarity here to what we saw in 2016, the first time Donald Trump was reelected, where he appealed to these working class voters who felt like then it was the recovery from the Great Recession, this time around the recovery from the pandemic and the resulting inflation, that they felt it was uneven. They felt it was unfair. The elites continued to do well, but the working class suffered, and we saw that at the ballot box here. Not only did Trump continue to do really well with white working class voters, he made real inroads with Latino voters, as we discussed at length yesterday, a little bit with black voters. He also made modest gains in the suburbs. It was across the board. It wasn't just 48 out of 50 states that he did well in, as Willie mentioned. He improved his marks in more than 90% of the nation's counties. This was across the board, the victory here for Republicans. And for Mika, as for Democrats, Kamala Harris received about 14 million fewer votes than Joe Biden did 4 years ago. That is a staggering number. And they have a lot of figuring out to do, and that process begins right now.
Lose your entire department leadership. Every single AAG will walk out on you. Your entire department leadership will walk out within hours. And I don't know what happens after that. And I said, Mr. President, within 24, 48, 72 hours, you could have hundreds and hundreds of resignations of the leadership of your entire Justice Department because of your actions. What's that going to say about you?
That's what happened last time. Hi again, everybody. It's 5 o'clock in New York. That's what happened when Donald Trump wanted to install coup enthusiast Jeffrey Clark at the top of DOJ last time he was president. That conversation, as told under oath, is what ensued. Our institutions and those who worked in them were able to prevent Donald Trump from following through with what he wanted to do, which was driven by his worst impulses. But now, with Trump set to return to the White House to be our president again, the open question being watched the world over is, will that be the case again? Will one man threaten that, quote, the entire department leadership and hundreds of others will walk out? Will he be restrained by anyone like that? Will he abide by the rule of law and people like Mr. Donahue, who were more committed to upholding the rule of law than Donald Trump? As we've heard from Donald Trump himself and his allies, Donald Trump plans on installing more loyal people and more of them in every corner of the federal government in his next administration. But he has paid special attention to and zeroed in on the Department of Justice as something he can specifically weaponize. He has said it out in the open that he wants to use the Department of Justice to go after, to prosecute, and to punish his enemies. And according to Project 2025, an independent Department of Justice is no more. That's gone. We won't have that again. They write that the Justice Department in the next administration should do this, quote, issue guidance to ensure that litigation decisions are consistent with the president's agenda and the rule of law, end quote. There's the Supreme Court, a usual check on the executive branch, which this summer showed it believes that This president is immune from prosecution for all official acts. And Special Counsel Jack Smith, who for the past year and a half has investigated and then indicted the ex-president over his role on January 6 and his mishandling of classified documents, including national defense information, is now moving to wind down both of those federal cases before they ever see the inside of a courtroom. New York Times reports this, quote, Trump's success in using his campaign as a protective shield has no parallel in legal or political history and highlights the many ways in which politics and justice have become tightly, if uncomfortably, entwined since he first sought the presidency 8 years ago. What happens to the rule of law in America is where we begin with some of our favorite experts and friends. Former top official at the Department of Justice, MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissmann is here, plus staff writer for The Atlantic and author of Autocracy, Inc., Anne Applebaum is here. Thank you to both of you. Andrew, your thoughts on any and all of this?
Well, I think that you are absolutely right to highlight this. We do have what happened in the first presidency in terms of the rule of law, and I think there's no reason to think that it's going to be any better. I should note, there's just to tie this into civil cases where the president, in a normal private civil case, for instance, the one brought against Rudy Giuliani, does not have direct authority. It's not part of the Department of Justice. But he could weaponize the Department of Justice against the plaintiffs. He could weaponize them against the lawyers. He could weaponize the Department of Justice against people like Letitia James, who has brought a successful civil suit. So there are many ways, even in the civil realm. But in the criminal realm, we're already seeing it with this idea of a drumbeat of going after people like Liz Cheney, where there's no factual predicate for it, but the White House does have control over the Department of Justice. I should note, though, on the good news side, is that at the end of the day, grand juries are involved, judges are involved. And when I think about the sort of threats about Liz Cheney, in many ways, I think, you know what? Does Donald Trump really want a case involving January 6th in a criminal courtroom? I mean, he's been fighting that for years, and going after Liz Cheney is only going to result in the revelation of damning facts. So some of this, I think, is something to really worry about, and some of this is something that may be saber-rattling with the idea of using it for fear, so that people toe the line and don't raise objections and aren't as vocal and exercising their First Amendment rights in the way that they should be.
Andrew Weissmann, I'm going to ask you some questions that put you on the spot. So if you don't want to answer them, I will understand. Donald Trump has never gotten over the cloud that hung over his presidency because of the Mueller investigation. And that was put in motion by serious questions of a Russian attack on the 2016 election. The original concerns were whether the Trump campaign, wittingly or unwittingly, there was a presumption that maybe they didn't even know about it. When those were investigated, everyone that touched that was fired, smeared, and or some combination of both. Some of them were audited aggressively by the IRS. They include people you know well, Jim Comey, Andrew McCabe, Pete Struggley. I mean, the list is lengthy. None of that will happen. If there's a question about something that a foreign adversary does and it touches Donald Trump, there's no mechanism to investigate him if he controls the Department of Justice and the FBI. Donald Trump will probably never be impeached again. The Republicans, at least for the first 2 years, control everything. And the Supreme Court has given him absolute immunity. With that articulated, let me just play what he said he plans to do with all that power.
What they've done is they've released the genie out of the box. You know, when you're president and you've done a good job and you're popular, you don't go after them so you can win an election. They've done indictments in order to win an election. They call it weaponization. And the people aren't going to stand for it. But yeah, they have done something that allows the next party. I mean, if I happen to be president and I see somebody who's doing well and beating me very badly, I say, go down and indict them. Mostly that would be, they would be out of business. They'd be out. They'd be out of the election.
So it's a little incoherent, but saying out loud that he plans to use the department as he sees fit to go out and get them. What should the country be prepared for, and what, if anything, should DOJ be prepared to be asked to do at his direction?
Well, first of all, for the people at the Department of Justice, their oath of office is going to be what has to guide them. But you're right to point out that one of the plans is to politicize the leadership. And if possible, they're talking about actually having that be the career people would also be replaced. And so that you won't have the people who will simply refuse to take action based on their oath of office, as we saw in connection with the effort to overthrow the will of the people that culminated in January 6th. I think one of the mistakes that people could make from this election, even with the results in terms of what's happened in Congress and the presidency, is for it to be for the people taking power to think that it's a mandate for the policies that they're advocating. And they really is, I think, a risk of them going way too far and overreading the results of what happened. You can see that, for instance, just in terms of reproductive rights. But I think it's probably true in other ways where you could end up with the incoming administration really going down the autocratic route that Anne has written about so cogently, and alienating many of the people who were voting for Trump for other reasons, but were not actually embodying his policies. And with the Department of Justice, it may not be the top of everyone's mind. Obviously, for people like me, for lawyers, for people who've been in the department, I view it as a cornerstone of our democracy, and as something that autocratic regimes, it's one of the first things that you go after to be able to take sort of, exclusive and reclusive authority and to chill any sort of opposition to what you're doing. But I do think there really is a heightened risk here in overreading the results of the election.
The Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Bob Woodward has written over 20 best-selling books spanning key points of basically every presidency in his life and career, as you see on your screen. It's really something. He spoke to Trump many times for his more recent reporting. There's a lawsuit, actually, that came out of that. His groundbreaking reporting with Bernstein on the Watergate scandal, of course, is part of what ultimately led to President Nixon's historic resignation. And he joined us recently about his new book, War, which deals with the wars and Middle East, as you see on the cover, everyone from Biden and Harris to Trump and Bibi Netanyahu and Putin. On this historic week, we are joined by Bob Woodward. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
What do you see in the election results?
Well, Trump won. He's going to become, in about 75 days, commander-in-chief. As we know, commander-in-chief has extraordinary power under our Constitution and under the practice. As president, he could decide, I'm going to send 10,000, 50,000 troops to a certain area or a certain country. In a practical sense, a president decides to almost declare war. The situation we're in now, I think it's important to think about avoiding catastrophes, because the world is very volatile. It is a truly dangerous place. And how will a President Trump exercise that? You just go through the Middle East, the Ukraine war, what's going on in Asia, Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader, who's one of the most volatile figures on the international stage, has an amazing arsenal of nuclear weapons that are hidden and buried and concealed and separated. Kim Jong-un now has made a partnership with Russia, and there's evidence that some of the troops from North Korea are going to aid Russia in the fight in Ukraine. Some people have said, I think with good reason, if we're going to get that many players involved in a violent war or almost war, we are close to we are edging toward some kind of World War III, and we damn well better be worried about it. I think we need to focus on is what is settled. Trump is going to be commander-in-chief and have that extraordinary power in a world. I mean, look what's going on in the Middle East. Look what's going on in the Ukraine war. And you go around the globe, and I'm really, really interested, and I think we all should be, who is Trump going to pick as his Secretary of State? Very importantly, his defense secretary. One of the things I found in my reporting this summer, Secretary of Defense Austin is really the hidden star in the Biden administration, did some very specific, pointed things to make sure that we protected the country. Can I bore you with just reading briefly one of them? Because in this detail, much hangs. So Austin called the Russian defense minister, Shoigu, and this is October 2022, and said, we know you are contemplating the use of tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Now, that's based on extraordinary intelligence. Austin laid out a case, which I have in the book, about why nuclear weapons should not be used. I think he made a compelling case. And Shoigu, after hearing that, took it very personally, or at least for Russia, and he said, I don't take kindly to being threatened. And Austin, I think, in one of the more remarkable, strong exchanges, said to Shoigu, Mr. Minister, I am the leader of the most powerful military in the history of the world. I don't make threats. Of course, he was making that threat, and Russia has not used tactical nuclear weapons, and I think that was a fact. Now, the question for us, who's going to be Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense? Is it going to be somebody like Austin? When I took a transcript of this call he had with the Russian defense minister to Austin and started reading it, he didn't know I had it, and to my surprise, he said, that's accurate. That's accurate. He confirmed it, and that, as you know, in reporting on particularly national security issues, that's very rare.
How do you think the press should approach the second term, given everything we know that on the one hand is a little different than other presidents, to say the least, but on the other still involves the foundation of facts and an open mind, not rushing to know what comes next?
Exactly, and it's got to be reported very, very aggressively, and we need to address the question. I've spent a lot of time on this. Who is Donald Trump? I first interviewed him 35 years ago when he was a real estate operator in New York City with Carl Bernstein, my Watergate reporting partner. And we asked Trump about, why are you doing something in a real estate deal? And it's taped with his permission. He just says, instinct. I went back over some interviews I did with Trump while he was president in 2019, the next to last year of his presidency. And a question came up about North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and who was threatening the United States and Trump. And Trump incredibly said, well, if he shoots, he shoots. And I asked, well, aren't you worried? Are you trying to drive him to the bargaining table? And Trump was incredibly dismissive. And then he went back to this question of instincts. Now, instincts are very personal, and interestingly and importantly, they are hidden from other people. I can say my instinct tells me to do X or Y. It's not accessible information to you, and you see Trump relying on this. What are the instincts?
But let me push you a little, Bob.
Sure, please.
How much should people pick up from where the last term ended? You factor in what you know about this leader who talks about the press as the enemy, who closed his campaign, referencing the shooting, the horrific shooting at him, and saying, oh, you could shoot through the press. How much do you pick up on that point and continue, and how much do you say, wait a minute, new president, let's see what happens?
But that's Trump, and I'm sorry to persist on this question of instinct, because it gives him or anyone a cover for why they're really doing things. And one of the number of things over the years I've learned about Trump, he actually rarely has a plan. He doesn't really have a team. I think you need a team to be president, and you really need to kind of telegraph what you're doing and where you're going, and that's not Donald Trump. So we are in a period of uncertainty. I would argue danger. My dealings with him the last year he was president, in the year 2000 was the year of the coronavirus, and I did 19 interviews with him, 9 hours, and it turned out he was warned that the virus was coming, and he covered it up, and he lied about it, and he concealed from the American people what he knew. If you look at what happened in that year in his own words, it is appalling. At 1.1 million people died of that virus. When there was one case in the United States, January 28th, the year 2020, Trump was given all the warnings from experts, national security experts. I interviewed, and I said, what are you going to do? What's the plan? And he kept, oh, well, don't worry, I'll come up with one. In the middle of the summer, incredibly, I asked him on July 20th, 140,000 people had died of the virus that you were warned about. What's your plan now? And he said, this is almost unbelievable. You hear it on a tape. He said, well, I'll have a plan in 106 days. That's election day. Yeah. He's only thinking about election, not the job
right,
he
and
has.
I think your reporting is striking on that, and now under the Constitution, he has no more elections to run.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. In the past 36 hours ago or so, since Donald Trump won the election, I've been spending a lot of time online getting into fights with people. What are you going to do? But I've basically been hearing two different sentiments about where we are and what happens next. And again, to my mind, neither one of them is rooted in a realistic view of what the election told us. The first sentiment is one that President Joe Biden offered today in his address to the nation, which is basically, we're going to be okay.
We lost this battle.
The America of your dreams is calling for you to get back up. That's the story of America for over 240 years and counting. It's a story for all of us, not just some of us. The American experiment endures. We're going to be okay.
I'm not so sure that I was persuaded by that. I don't think it's going to persuade a lot of people who are feeling rightly anxious right now. I don't know if we're going to be okay, or that the American experiment in its current form is going to endure for sure. I mean, it didn't after the election of 1876, which ended Reconstruction, to cite one example. We got to act to protect it and ourselves. And to be able to do that, you have to avoid falling into the other sentiment I've seen everywhere today, which is just like total despair. Across social media, I've seen lots of people saying things like, get ready to steel your spine for when they put you in the camps in Gitmo. When you tell people terrible things are unstoppable, that there's no way out, you invite them to surrender to the terrible. So those are two poles of some of the stuff that's going on today. And there's all a bunch of discourse happening, as there always is. I think here's my take on a better way forward, okay? A path to be charted in the vast ground between everything is okay and we're totally screwed. And to me, it really does come down to understanding just the fundamental lay of the land today. I can tell you one guy who I think doesn't really understand that.
America has given us an unprecedented and powerful mandate. We have taken back control of the Senate. Wow, that's good.
It's true, Republicans did take back the Senate. What the final number is yet to be determined. But I really don't think it's true that Donald Trump got a powerful mandate. And it sure was not unprecedented. Now, the other weird thing that's happening right now is there's plenty of people who are opposed to Donald Trump on the left and liberals who seem to want to agree with him, who are like online posting that it wasn't even close. It was a landslide. It was a blowout. Listen to me. It absolutely was not. This was always polled to be a very close election in a very evenly divided nation. It was a close election that Donald Trump pulled out. I mean, he won. That was always an obvious possibility. We've talked about basically in every show we've covered the election. And again, he did win the popular vote by basically a similar margin to the last time a Republican won the popular vote. That was George W. Bush in 2004 after the invasion of Iraq. Now, if you're being cynical, you can make the case that Republicans who want to earn a popular vote majority just have to do spectacularly terrible things, like start a disastrous war in the Middle East that takes hundreds of thousands of lives or incite a violent insurrection. Somehow those are, I don't know, majority makers? But the basics of this election were that things changed a bit at the margins. And the main thing that changed was that Americans overwhelmingly say in poll after poll after poll, the country is on the wrong track. And they say that, as best we can tell, largely because they just feel squeezed economically. Now, there's a lot to dissect about why that was the case. President Joe Biden guided the U.S. out of a pandemic and avoided a recession, tamed inflation while boosting real wages and industrial growth and infrastructure. It did not feel that way to so many American voters. And I think if you watch the show, and maybe you're just turning in for the first time now, I personally am as big a fan of Bidenomics basically as anyone in public life. I continue to believe it was an enormous success substantively. It was the best economic stewardship of a president in my lifetime. It failed politically. We just got the verdict on it. It was, to many voters, more of the same. And it was swallowed by inflation. And that's not a trend that is unique to the U.S. Coming out of COVID, the entire world experienced a surge in inflation worse than any global bout of inflation in 30 years, if not more. Like, no one really who is under 30 had ever experienced anything like this. And let me tell you something. Voters absolutely hated it everywhere, from the UK to India to Poland to Argentina and Botswana, from North Macedonia to South Korea and South Africa. Voters have punished incumbent politicians and parties in the wake of COVID and the inflation. Look at this chart, okay? It's put together by U.S. economist Gennady Rudkovich. These are the results for incumbent parties, which, by the way, span the spectrum, okay, in all the major Western national elections held this year. They all got toasted, lost ground, most by double digits. Every governing party facing election in a developed country this year lost vote share, according to the Financial Times. In fact, according to their data, it's the first time this has ever happened going back to at least 1905, essentially the birth of the franchise and industrial democracy. Now, the Biden-Harris ticket, Harris-Walz ticket, Biden administration, the Democratic Party, was actually the most successful of these incumbent parties. They only lost 7% of their support, and indeed, I think that has to do with the fact that the economic response was better. There's no denying people everywhere around the world basically came out of the turbulence and trauma of COVID and then the supply shocks and the inflation, and they were like, this sucks. I don't like this. So why am I saying this? Well, take that to heart. And I'm not just saying this to like spin things. I truly believe this is the story of the election. And the reason I say this is because all the theories about what to do now and how to resist the worst MAGA plans and win people back to decency and democratic pluralism depend upon understanding and grasping the situation clearly. Right now, the biggest task we have is persuading our fellow Americans and shifting public opinion. And doing it every time MAGA Republicans overreach and pick fights that are going to be disastrous for them, and they will overreach. You heard Trump talk about a big mandate as if this was a red wave election. It wasn't. I mean, right now you've got lots of Democrats winning narrow, contested races in tough terrains, pulling rabbit out of hat after rabbit out of a hat. A bunch of House seats uncalled, the balance of power shockingly yet to be decided. Now, I think the most likely eventuality is Republicans gain a narrow trifecta in Washington. And to be clear, that's terrible, okay? The fundamental truth about the United States in the last, say, 16 years, it's basically a 50-50 country. It's a 50-50 country, but underneath the surface, this huge structural thing's happening, right? This massive class realignment is happening. And what happens is, in every given election, one side or the other gets a little better part of the trade that keeps happening between working class and college-educated professional class voters. It happens in every election. So Trump and the Republicans, they got the better part of the trade, certainly in electoral college grounds in 2016. Then they lost some ground in 2018. Then Democrats benefited from that trade in 2020, right? Suburban voters, more educated voters, worked pretty well for them in 2022, particularly in the suburbs. That's the basic electoral structure. And on top of that, we got to reckon with the information environment that is all happening in. Everything is mediated through social media, which is not some like other place, but is just life. It's not like, oh, the phones and then real life. Like that's life. And the most autocratic forces in our political culture are able to manipulate public opinion through social media and misinformation in ways that are genuinely scary, ways we got to reckon with. A big part of our conversations going forward. I actually just spent several years writing a book about it. But all that said, it was not a landslide. It wasn't a walkover, okay? We've had those in American history. We are not looking at Reagan in 1980 or Nixon in 72 or even Barack Obama in 2008. It was a toss-up race in a bad environment for incumbents in a 50-50 nation that was previously ruled with a narrow but durable pro-democratic majority. I think it still has a pro-democratic majority in which a certain sliver of those folks just voted on other stuff. America didn't give itself over to Trumpism. We got this outcome because 3 out of 100 people switched their votes in a nation that weathered a global pandemic and global inflation pretty well, but not well enough. And it's disappointing as hell. But it's plenty to build a movement on going forward.
And good evening, everyone. This is our first chance to be together one-on-one since the election. So I wanted to begin tonight with an acknowledgement of our new reality. Millions of Americans woke up Tuesday morning full of hope and joy, anticipating the election, finally, of America's first woman president. They put their faith in Vice President Kamala Harris to deliver not just the star-studded joy and the power of the culture from Beyonce to Taylor to basically every star in Hollywood, plus the many memes and incredible digital content, but also the change. that could make this multicultural democracy real and accessible and affordable to everyone. I mean, money for elder care and small businesses and child tax credits, what? But that is obviously not what happened. Instead, knowing all that we know about Donald Trump, his vulgarity and venality, his 34 felony counts and adjudicated sexual abuse of E. Jean Carroll, and so many other women he preyed on, his buddy-buddy relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, his theft of classified documents, his fealty to Vladimir Putin, and that attempted coup. Despite all of that, a majority of American voters actively chose him over her. Women all over this country know what it feels like to be the far more qualified woman who loses the job to mediocre or underqualified men. Black women doubly so. And people are rightfully depressed and scared. The Republican Party has made it clear they're not mad at the whole Nazi thing. They actually find some of the ideas, mass deportation, internment camps, white Christian nationalism, to be kind of okay. And autocracy definitely feels imminent. This era is especially frightening if you're a woman or black or gay or bi or trans or in an immigrant or in a mixed status family. And that danger is not in your head. And even in a normal time, when an election goes sideways, it is tempting to feel kind of dumb for having ever believed that the change you dreamed of was possible at all. I mean, who were we to believe that America would ever elect a woman, let alone a black and Asian woman as its president? I mean, sure, Mexico just did it, but not us. We're America. We don't do these things. But it is not crazy or dumb to believe in the possibilities of America. Millions of people all around the world do too. My parents did. That's why they, like so many immigrants, including Kamala Harris's parents, came here to this crazy platypus of a country cobbled together by people from everywhere and with its tortured history, but also so much potential. It is not crazy to believe. It's not crazy to dream. In fact, it's kind of sad not to. And Kamala Harris lived up to our dreams. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. She ran a remarkable 107-day emergency campaign full of joy and hope. She and Tim Walz raised $1 billion in a couple of months, and she whipped Trump in their one and only debate. And yesterday, at her alma mater, Howard University, Kamala Harris, first of her name, did something Donald Trump would never do. She conceded graciously and vowed to conduct a peaceful transfer of power.
Now, I know folks are feeling and experiencing a range of emotions right now. I get it. But we must accept the results of this election. Earlier today, I spoke with President-elect Trump and congratulated him on his victory. I also told him that we will help him and his team with their transition, and that we will engage in a peaceful transfer of power.
Imagine that. She also spoke directly to young Americans who chose her at a rate of 54 to 43% over Donald Trump for 18 to 29-year-olds and 49 to 48% for voters 30 to 44, according to the NBC exit polls. And particularly millennial and Gen Z women, who went 61-37 in her favor for 18 to 29-year-olds and 54-43 from age 30 to 44. Millions of college students, recent graduates, and young Americans who put their faith in her.
Sometimes the fight takes a while. That doesn't mean we won't win. That doesn't mean we won't win. The important thing is don't ever give up. Don't ever give up. Don't ever stop trying to make the world a better place. You have power. You have power.
And make no mistake, fam, it is young Americans, not those of us in Gen X or boomers or retired silent generation folks who are the economically insecure. Young Americans are the ones who can't afford to buy a home or start a business or a family. They are the ones who have economic anxiety, not the people of my generation, Gen X, many of whom have savings in the bank and bitch about the economy while planning overseas vacations. Yet it was the hip-hop and Hulk Hogan generation, the F Your Feelings latchkey kids who came up on Dynasty, Dallas, and The Apprentice, who were the lone age group that voted in a majority for Trump. A majority of Gen X voted to turn America into an autocracy and to condemn our kids and grandkids to a far-right Supreme Court, probably for the rest of their lives. And it was not just Gen X, because while 91% of black women voted for Kamala Harris, 53% of white women overall voted for Trump, despite the open disrespect and demonization hurled by J.D. Vance and the Supreme Court stripping women's bodily autonomy, courtesy of Donald Trump, who closed his repulsive campaign by dropping the B word on Nancy Pelosi. The breakdown by education was stark. Harris won 57% of white women with college degrees and lost 63% of white women without them. It was also men. Trump won every age group of men, including 60% of Gen X men and 6 in 10 white men. Also Latino men, who, despite the utter disrespect shown by Trump and his promise to deport some of your mixed status families, most of them voted in a 55% majority to make the deportations happen. Y'all voted with Stephen Miller and David Duke and against your own sisters and chose Kamala Harris with 60% of their votes. So you own everything that happens to your mixed status families and to your wives, sisters, and abuelas from here on in. However, we only have so much time for blame. We now need to make a plan. Because Donald Trump's spokesperson has already confirmed that upon taking office at noon on January 20, 2025, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, he will begin the mass deportation of up to 11 million immigrants who are living and working in America. He plans to put Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in charge of at least parts of our health care, which could deprive millions of Americans of life-saving vaccines. And he and his people will implement Project 2025, something he pretended he didn't know anything about when he was lying to you on the campaign trail, when he wasn't, pretending to fillet a microphone or rambling for hours in front of sparse crowds. Cue the national abortion ban via the Comstock Act as well. And then there are the tariffs, which will make the price of everything soar, while he and Elon Musk grift money out of our economy to share with their fellow billionaire friends, while mainly Gen Z and millennial Americans and retirees feel the pain. So here we are. And what I can tell you is what I plan to do. And what I plan to do is to refuse to take the knee or be silent. Because when an autocracy begins to form, it is really important that the press, to the extent it can, continue to speak, continue to inform people about what is happening, and to give you the means and the strategies to resist and survive. It is important that civil society and the arts continue to speak, that individual citizens remain vigilant and not back down or cower in fear. So that is what I and the team here at The ReidOut are going to do. We will make sure you stay informed, forewarned, and equipped to survive whatever he and his MAGA cronies try to do to the people in this country.